Where do I begin? The last month and a bit have been a crazy adrenaline rush of big updates and changes to Galactic Chef, and I've gotten a lot of great feedback, both in terms of positive feedback and useful feedback. A lot of things that I still need to change, and probably the most exciting part of all this is the Jonathan Blow, who created Braid and The Witness, played my game and gave me a lot of valuable insights on how I can make the game more approachable, which is going to be my next priority, but more on that later. First, I'm going to walk through some of the big changes. Throughout this period, I've also been getting a bit more organized and prioritizing all the feedback I've gotten to try to figure out, at any given time, what are the most valuable things I can work on. Early on, that was adding a soundtrack. That was one of the most common comments I got, along with needing a tutorial. So those were the first things I worked on. I spent about a week making the current soundtrack, but there will of course be more in the future. The tutorial has been through several iterations now. The first one was pretty basic and pretty short, and it still is pretty short, but every time I've made a major update, I've also had to rethink about the tutorial because the UI and the steps that you need to succeed have been changing. Probably the biggest of those changes was switching from dragging tools around as loose objects to making your mouse pointer become the tool when you select it. And that makes a lot of things less tedious, especially when it comes to extracting and injecting liquids into containers, because it's just one click to extract and one click to inject now. Similarly, the hammer, you just click to flatten. The flipper, you click to flip food. And a lot of the time you'll be using the gravitongs to just drag objects around. After that, one of the main things I heard was it was hard to figure out where the toxic pit was in the ingredient where you had to laser out the pit. So I've changed the magnified laser board view to be a scanner that actually shows all hazards as a bright color while everything else is darkened. So you can precisely remove not only this, but any other hazard that you might have just a little bit of. Like let's say it's a tiny bit of your meat that didn't get cooked all the way, or a tiny bit of something that didn't get washed. Fairly early on, I also added in judge preferences, which really changed the way you think about composing your dish. Unfortunately, I emphasized that a bit too much, and so people just kept picking the judge's favorite ingredients and only those, and most of their dishes ended up pretty much the same. As part of this, I also had to make some big changes to the notebook, which became the data pad. It was sort of a wiki browser of sorts where you could click links to figure out how to do different techniques, etc. But when I was playing this on a live stream, I realized that I was having to flip back and forth between pages too often, and this just wasn't a good experience. So someone luckily suggested in Discord a planning phase, and now I have a full screen planner view which puts all the information you need on one screen and lets you put together a recipe of steps you intend to take, which then carries over to the kitchen view where you can see your steps and click on links to see more details about how to execute them. I've actually temporarily removed the judge preferences while I'm still sorting out the planning view and what sort of things I want you to have to balance. The scoring criteria and how that information is presented have also gone through several iterations. At some point I felt like the introductory cutscenes were getting a bit too repetitive and too long, and so I started cutting them back, but I may have gone too far, and I'm still trying to find that perfect balance. As you may notice, I've also started animating the talking of the judges and the host, and I've just taken out the agree and disagree lines completely to streamline the commentary that they give you. What else did I add? There are new soup bowls, new ingredient templates, and I've added a food vacuum for cleaning up little bits of things left behind on the laser board. I actually removed the bandbox selection because I don't think many people discovered it or fully understood it, and instead the main selection tool now has a little bit of a pulling effect where it will draw in objects that are close to it. It makes it a lot easier to grab plates, for example, because if you click and hold right outside the edge of the plate, it'll pull the plate closer, and that'll usually be the first thing you grab rather than the food on top of it. And in fact, I've changed the way that food flattens with the grav hammer as well, so that it's more circular overall. It doesn't have that weird square effect, and it's less likely to overhang the edges of the plate. Really, a lot of the changes over the last month have been these little polish things where something just didn't quite feel right or didn't quite make sense, and I've just tweaked things to make it better. And I almost forgot there are now different game modes. In addition to the full season, there's a 3-challenge pilot episode, as well as creative mode, and the tutorial is just an extra introductory challenge before the pilot episode. And I've added difficulty settings because I found it a bit too easy when I was playing it on stream, but other players that are new to it are still finding it a bit too hard. But really, the difficulty setting isn't going to fix the main part of why some people found the game difficult or overwhelming. The main thing is, I've thrown players in the deep end. Even with the tutorial, you see a big chart of textures and flavors, and there's just a lot to look at, a lot to think about, and that's why I think my main takeaway from when Jonathan Blow played my game is that I need to ramp up the complexity over time, and that's going to be my next big focus. There are a lot of other great points in there too, like that I needed to make the text crisper, which I've just done in the latest 0.61 update, but really ramping up the difficulty is by far the most important thing I need to address. So while I was already thinking about having a progression of different game modes and twists on the challenges, I'm going to adjust that plan to start with what I'm calling the Road to Galactic Chef. Rather than starting with the actual Galactic Chef competition, I'm going to have the player go through a series of simpler challenges that are sort of making a name for yourself so that you can get invited to compete on Galactic Chef. You're going to start on Earth with something very simple, then you'll move to another alien civilization where the judges have a much simpler set of criteria, a much simpler palette, and possibly another intermediate step or two. But then, after you've done all that, it'll be a lot less overwhelming when you're presented with the texture chart and all the criteria as they are today. Although that may still change. I may be simplifying things a bit. The texture chart having currently 15 textures isn't necessarily the final form. I'm thinking about stripping it back, partly just so the UI is less confusing and complicated, but also because another good point Jonathan Blow made was having a lot of variables is a form of breadth, but not depth of gameplay. And in the end, what you're really doing in the game as is trying to find a combination of techniques and ingredients to result in a specific set of numbers, let's say. You're trying to balance flavors and textures to make sure you have the right number of different ones without too much of any one thing, etc. And while some players do enjoy that type of puzzle, there's a lot of room to do other things to make it more varied and interesting. Like, for example, making the cooking step actually take a bit more skill, rather than you can just leave it in the pan on medium indefinitely and it doesn't burn because you don't have it on high. I was always planning on tweaking some of that and making things overcook, but now I'm really thinking about it from a different direction. What can I do to make it feel like it really takes skill to execute a technique correctly? I don't have a final answer to that yet. I'm still digesting all the feedback I've gotten from Jonathan Blow, the Steam community, and Discord, and trying to come up with a big picture for how the progression of complexity and making the cooking gameplay more interesting can fit together. So you're probably going to see slower updates for a while as I'm trying to figure out the long-term direction, but I think over the next couple of months you're going to see some big changes and it's going to be a much more interesting game in the end. If you want to try it out for yourself, the demo and playtest versions are still available on Steam. The only difference is the playtest version is a debug build which has some additional error checks and a little log window that might help if you run into a bug. If you can copy the log text and send that to me, that may be helpful in figuring out what went wrong. And if you want to do me a huge favor, spreading the word can make all the difference in the world to a small indie dev like me. Whether it's live streaming, posting Let's Play videos on YouTube, or just telling a friend, any of that really helps. And of course, adding it to your wish list if you might want to buy the finished game when it's ready. It also helps me out if you hit the like button and subscribe if you haven't already. And of course, thanks for watching.